Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kent City Council workshop. This is our first workshop of the year. Today is Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. I would like to welcome anyone that is watching us via Facebook, City of Kent, the Kent TV 21 YouTube channel, and anyone that is calling in. Again, this is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 health and safety requirements ordered by the governor. And looking at our agenda, we've got a couple items this evening, and we are going to start with something that's not on the agenda. I'd like to welcome Chad Barron to talk just a couple minutes about the weather that we've been having, this rain, and how it's affecting some of the water flow around the city. So Chad, if you don't mind, take it away.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the interruption. I don't want to be the weatherman, but as everybody can see from looking outside, or it's dark enough now, you can't really see outside. The last weekend we had quite an event, Saturday afternoon into Sunday morning. We are looking at another one coming in tonight. We've opened up the Department Operations Center, or DOC, to keep everyone updated. We'll have crews out all night going out to what we call our hot spots, where we have localized flooding. We see about 60 areas where we see localized flooding when we have very heavy rains, which again we expect tonight. So we'll keep an eye on those. Over the weekend, we had to close 256th Street, 148th Avenue, James Street, and we also had some flooding on 132nd. Didn't force us to close the road, but it was getting close to that. We'll keep an eye on all those spots and keep everybody up to date. All the roads are open right now, but again, with what's predicted, we could see closures into the late evening and overnight hours. And again, we'll have crews on standby. One crew's on standby. Other crews are out in the field from 4 to midnight, and then from midnight overnight into the morning hours. One thing that happened over the weekend, we had to close James Street from about 9 p.m. on Saturday evening into Sunday morning, about 10:30 in the morning. And the James Street pump station, we had some questions on social media about, is it operating? What's happening with that thing? You know, we put the pump station in to eliminate flooding, but we're still getting flooding. And it's one thing to note, we put the pump station in to help reduce flooding. It wasn't going to be able to eliminate flooding. We have flows in excess of 100 cubic feet per second that come down Mill Creek Canyon when we have big rain events. The James Street pump station can handle about 12 cubic feet per second. And that was the maximum size of the pump station we could build and still get all the water down south to the Horseshoe Acres pump station where it pumps into the river. So it helps out quite a bit. It ends up attenuating flooding events. If folks remember in the past, we would end up with big events where James Street would be closed for 2 to 3 days sometimes while it drained out. And as we noticed on Saturday and into Sunday, it was closed for about 12 hours, 13 hours. So it does help out quite a bit. We do need to continue to work on, we have the Upper Mill Creek Dam completed now, so that did help out and will continue to help out. And then the Mill Creek Reestablishment Project that we've talked about with council a number of times, where we need to dredge out Mill Creek from the canyon all the way to about 212th Street. That's really what needs to happen to help continue to take care of the flooding in the major part of the valley here at the bottom of the hill. So again, the pump station has been working. In fact, over the weekend, those overnight hours before the street got reopened, it pumped 4 million gallons out into the river directly. So it is working, and we hope that it continues to attenuate the long-term flooding and just create shorter term closures. But we will keep that James Street and all the streets open as much as we possibly can. 256 and 148th are a little different story. We don't have pump stations out there. We do have long-term improvements that we need to do at both those locations, but they're very expensive and they're going to require some significant permits. So those aren't improvements. 144th is another one. The similar story, 144th Avenue south of Kent Kangley, where significant cost is going to be incurred and permits required to get those improvements done. But as we've been doing over the last 30 years, we'll continue to peck away at localized flooding and improve both the valley and then the areas up on the hill where we have those issues. But thank you for allowing me a little bit of time for an update.
I have a quick question for Chad, Madam
Yes, please go ahead.
Today, Chad, the 256 and 148, is that's all Kent or that's Covington will be a joint venture? Because I'm okay with that being closed at the backside of my house and it's so quiet, so no rush for that. And then for the dredging that we need to do, what's the timeline around getting that done? I know it's not all us. I think the federal government has something to do with it. So just curious, your thoughts on that.
At 256 and 148, they're both within the city of Kent. So would I like it to be a joint venture with Covington? Yeah, because it's quite an expense, but they are solely within the city limits. So those are our responsibility. But they're also not quite as high on the priority list because they're on the edge of town too, to be blunt about it. The Mill Creek Reestablishment Project, we've been trying to get permits for that for about 2 to 3 years now. And we see about another 2 years in the process to get the permits. That is a salmon bearing stream. So getting the permits is a really big deal. It's a significant environmental habitat area for salmonids for all the salmon species. So getting those permits is taking us a long time. And we hope that within the next couple of years, we'll be able to satisfy all the stakeholders that have a role in those permits, and we'll be able to get the permit and get the project underway.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Chad? All right. Thank you so much, Chad. I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thanks again.
All right. Take care. Okay. Moving on, we are going to have a presentation on the Transportation Master Plan, Concurrency Transportation Impact Fees. So April, welcome.
Thank you so much, and Happy New Year, everyone. So tonight, this is April Delchamps. I'm the transportation planner for the city of Kent, but also on this presentation tonight is Kendra Breland and Emily Ellis Gearhart with Farron Pierce, the consultants on board. Next slide, please. So tonight I want to go over some key terms related to concurrency and transportation impact fees, give a little bit of background on those transportation impact fees. I wanted to give a little bit of comparison of transportation impact fees when compared to our neighbors, a key update staff is looking to make to our program, and then comparing that to the prioritized project list that we have presented on before. Also in this mixed bag tonight is going to be a little bit of a 101 on concurrency and how it works with transportation impact fees, give a little background on some of the recommended concurrency approaches that staff are looking at, and then wrap it out with next steps. Next slide, please.
Okay,
And I'm going to turn it over to Kendra.
Okay, thank you, April, and good evening, council members. Before we really dive into the details, there are 3 key terms that are highly technical, interrelated, and central to the implementation of the TMP. The first one is multimodal level of service. So the TMP outlines standards for each mode of travel: walking, biking, driving, and transit. This provides guidance on the type of infrastructure that needs to be provided to offer safe and comfortable conditions for each mode. So we like to think about multimodal level of service policies, or MMLOS policies, as we might refer to them later in the presentation, as the promise of how the transportation system will perform in the TMP. Concurrency is a state requirement that cities maintain the level of service standards that they've included within their transportation master plans as they grow. So really, it's just making sure that that promise is kept. And Washington is fairly unique. There's only a couple other states around the country that have this law, but it is something that we absolutely must abide by. And the last term that I wanted to bring up is impact fees. So these are a mechanism for paying for the infrastructure needed to accommodate growth. And they can be spent on kind of really any capacity related project that includes many of the projects that are considered by concurrency, but it can even extend a bit beyond that. So, of course, tonight, big topic that we're going to talk about is updating the City of Kent's Transportation Impact Fee Program. So we can go to the next slide. So just a bit of just impact fees 101. I think we've shared some of this with council in the past, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. But if anybody has any questions, by all means, feel free to ask. So transportation impact fees are one-time charges paid by new development. They've been around since the 1990 Growth Management Act. And again, they're a really critical funding source for transportation improvements. The funds can only be spent on projects that add capacity, and they're really a mechanism for the city to partner effectively with developers such that growth can kind of help pay for the capacity needs of growth. And they impact fees. There are some limitations in state law in terms of the types of projects that we can fund with impact fees. They need to be projects that are within the right of way of streets and roads. And again, these are projects that provide capacity, so they can't be filling potholes or some of the more nuts and bolts repair of our system. So if we can go to the next slide. Just few more details here, and I'll pass it back to April. Transportation impact fees must be spent within 10 years of collection. And again, they can be multimodal projects, but they must be within the right of way in streets and roads. So that includes sidewalks, that can include bike lanes. To the extent that you have a trail facility within that right of way, it can be included. Intersections and roundabout improvements, those are all very eligible types of projects. They must be projects that are within the capital facilities element of your comprehensive plan. So as a part of the transportation master plan, this would definitely extend to the prioritized project list. And as a part of this update, we're really looking to fund a host of very multimodal projects, and that's consistent with many other communities in recent updates to impact fee programs. So April, can I pass it back to you?
Perfect, thank you. So when we talk about transportation impact fees, typically we think about it in per trip cost. So for 2021, to kind of orient you, the trip cost is $5,381.98 per trip. A lot of the questions in application on where it tends to rubber meet the road kind of is when you think about what that means for different land uses. So comparatively, so for 2021, inside of downtown, which has a slight decrease due to the type of development, a single family home would owe about $3,951.94, where outside it would be just under $4,900. For a multifamily inside downtown, that would be $2,565 or so, and outside of downtown, that would be $3,167. Next slide, please. When we're thinking about our neighbors, how that compares, and Kent is number 2 on your list. We fall about for single family, and this is again the outside downtown, so no discount rate is on here. When you look at single family, we're actually on the lower end when you look at different cities around the South Sound and even one on the east side with Bellevue. For multifamily, we fall a little bit more in the median, middle of the road. So we are very much comparable to our neighbors where we're at now, and maybe a little bit low on the single family rate. Next slide, please. And pass it over to Kendra.
Great, thank you. So we've been working with staff over the past couple of months in thinking about what a transportation impact fee program update might look like. And we've identified some key updates that we think make a lot of sense for this update, for this transportation impact fee program. So some of the key updates, first of all, land use categories. So Kent has about 43 land use categories today. And there's new data about some of those land use categories. We recognize that you don't have a lot of categories of different types of housing. So staff has expressed to us an interest in developing potentially new impact fee rates for middle housing types. So that would include condominiums and different types of multifamily type development. Industrial categories, thinking there's definitely a lot of new national data about the trip generation characteristics of industrial uses, so making sure that we have that right-sized. And then daycare is one that city staff has highlighted that they're pretty displeased with the rate right now. It is much higher than one would desire, and so they've encouraged us to look for opportunities maybe to reduce that rate in recognition of that important land use, but also the recognition that it may not be as impactful as kind of older data might have suggested. Another update that we're looking to is to expand discount zones. So April showed that you have a discount within the downtown area. That's in recognition of kind of some of the transit amenities and the proximity of uses. There is a lot of data out there to show that development that occurs within an area like your downtown actually tends to be less impactful on the transportation system because more people are able to walk or bike or use transit. So expanding that discount area to also think about the Midway area, given the major transit investments that are coming there. And then last but not least, just to make sure that the impact fee program is structured in a way that helps us fund the very multimodal investments of the TMP. So we've got a lot of projects that are helping people to walk, bike, and use transit more comfortably within the city of Kent. So making sure that the program is structured so that we can defensively fund those types of projects, in addition to auto capacity projects. So there's a pretty robust list that we're looking to fund. And actually, if we can go to the next slide, that provides kind of a snapshot of the projects that the updated impact fee program would fund. So just as a reminder, we're working really closely on kind of developing a draft TMP right now. It includes 96 projects on the prioritized project list. About half of those projects, so 50 of those projects, actually, when we did an assessment of their consistency with state requirements for inclusion in impact fee program, we found that actually 50 of those projects would be eligible for inclusion in the program. But when you looked at the actual capital dollar value of each of those projects, as you know, not every project has the same cost associated with it. The vast majority of the capital cost of projects on your prioritized project list are eligible for impact fees. So that's really good news in that we can look for ways to make sure that impact fees are an important source of funding that prioritized project list. And so we do go through some technical processes to strip out portions of projects that aren't eligible for impact fees. And when all is said and done, of that $227 million worth in projects, so again, those 50 projects, almost half of the capital value of those projects are things that could be translated into impact fees. So impact fees could generate as much as $98 million over the life of your impact fee program. And there's definitely some details we'll need to work out, but just to kind of share with you that there's a lot of potential for impact fees to be an important project funding mechanism. So we can go to the next slide. Very quickly here, I just wanted to kind of give you an update on kind of some of the steps we're taking to update Kent's concurrency program. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, concurrency is really how the city tracks its progress in building its multimodal system over time, making sure that you're building that system as you grow as a community. So if you can go to the next slide. As a reminder, the TMP, a key feature of the TMP is a layered transportation network. So as a part of the TMP, there was a lot of thought and care put in by council members, by the community, by city staff to think about what are those critical facilities for making sure that we're providing safe and comfortable accommodations for people walking, biking, taking transit, driving, even that we're thinking about what is needed for serving freight. And so that multimodal level of service, those policies really informed the construction of the TMP prioritized project list. We can go to the next slide. So concurrency, again, is really how do we make sure that as Kent grows, and as you know, over the next 20 years, there's a fair number of new employees, new households that are anticipated to come to Kent. So this is us developing a program that really helps us track that growth over time, but make sure that we're continuing to provide a functional and safe transportation system. So if you can go to the next slide. So one thing in working with staff is we recognize your current concurrency program is very auto-oriented. It really just looks at the function of the city's intersection, so how long a driver is waiting at an intersection. While that is a very important measure, and we don't discount that, that measure is a bit outdated, and it really isn't consistent with the guidance we're getting both from the state and from the region to make sure that we're crafting our concurrency programs now to be multimodal and to think about the experience of the transportation system for all travel modes. So here's a bit of kind of state law and PSRC guidance for how we should be crafting our concurrency programs. And if you can go to the next slide, we worked with city staff to consider 3 potential structures for your concurrency program. And where we have landed is a model that is currently in place for the city of Redmond, Kirkland, and Kenmore, and is actually being currently adopted in the city of Olympia, and actually the city of Bellevue is working to develop a program like this as well. So the program is based on the premise of multimodal system completeness, and really it's just a tracking system. It tracks as the city grows and allows in more development. It is tracking your capital investments year by year to make sure that you are keeping pace with your capital investments, your multimodal capital investments, to provide the capacity that you need for additional trips that are being generated by people walking or by people coming from kind of some of the new development that's coming into the city. And the really neat thing about this system is that it's not necessarily solely focused on a single intersection's operations, but it's providing the city with substantial flexibility to really take credit for that new sidewalk that's constructed, or that new intersection that's been improved, the new traffic signal or the new roundabout or the new bicycle greenway, to ensure that we're keeping track of that capacity, we're taking credit for it as we allow additional development in the city. So it's something that keeps the city accountable in terms of making sure that you are keeping that promise, you are building that multimodal transportation system that we've promised within the TMP, but at the same time, it isn't hamstringing the city to the performance of any individual facility. So if you can go to the next slide, just wanted to share some of the pros and cons. With any system, I always promise cities there is no silver bullet, but we feel like this system offers kind of the best of kind of all the options that we have considered. So it on the pro side, it recognizes the capacity provided by multimodal infrastructure that the city is constructing. It's consistent with state and regional guidance. It's explicitly considering the MMLOS policies that all city staff and the community have put a lot of thought into. And it is an opportunity to really streamline the development review process, as it can be simplified down to kind of a spreadsheet type exercise. But to be candid, it is a new way of doing business, so it is going to require a learning curve. That is something we acknowledge, and it may require additional steps in the development review process just to make sure that intersections are operating. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't guarantee that any individual facility in the city is achieving kind of a level of service standard. It's really more of a capital completion tracking method. So that's kind of just the update on where we are with concurrency. We still got quite a bit of work ahead of us. So any feedback that you guys provide tonight, we would certainly take that into consideration. I think with that, I'll pass it back to you, April, and you can share what our next steps are.
Perfect, thank you. So this is kind of the first introduction to transportation impact fees and concurrency. We're going to be coming back to you next. Thank you. We're coming back on kind of on the document side. We're looking at adoption of the TMP in February, specifically February 16th of 2021. And the crafting of the TIF and concurrency programs are going on right now, and they will run through the end of March, maybe the beginning of April. And what that looks like at the staff level is we have that same working group, interdepartmental group, that we've been working considerably with, and we've also added development engineering. So Brennan over in his group. And we're working through some of the details that some of these numbers came from. So some of the workshops one of the workshops that we've already done, we've had a very large spreadsheet that we were able to go through and understand how we got to the total dollar of projects that qualified for a transportation impact fee. So some of those really in the deep dive section are things that staff are going over, and we're going to be continuing those workshops. We're planning a workshop in January to go over transportation impact fees and also concurrency, and we'll be working with them to bring you back this in February with some hard numbers on what the program's going to look like and what staff is recommending for the rate that we think makes sense to move forward in the ordinance process. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Lots of great explanations. Councilmember Boyce, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam President. April, first of all, you have done a phenomenal job just keeping us in the loop throughout this whole process and so on. I think for the most part, we all probably got a good understanding on where we're going. Is there anything concrete that you need from us to continue to move forward? I mean, I personally like the direction that we're going. So I just wonder if there anything that you need from us to make sure you march down the right direction.
I think as we've gone through this process, you guys have done a phenomenal job of giving feedback through all of this, especially when we talked about budget towards the end of last year. So I think staff have a really good sense of expectations as we're crafting kind of a solution that we think makes sense to move forward with the ordinance process. And that's what we're planning to bring to the council on our next update, is going to be kind of that proposal and get your feedback if we need to go up a little or down a little bit and gauge your comfort level. And for concurrency, I think part of as we go forward, this is extremely on the administrative side of it. And so I think it's going to be giving you a preview on what staff is going to be spending some time with and giving you a good understanding of what that looks like and some of the nuts and bolts of it going forward in case you are asked questions about it.
Great, thank you, April. Any other questions or comments for April? All right, looking forward to seeing you back here shortly. And our next presentation is the Human Services Commission grant award process. And this came about during us talking through the budget process. This was a recommendation wanting to see more about this program and how it works. So welcome to Merina.
Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. Thanks for the chance to share all of the behind the scenes details about our funding process that we recently wrapped up. And I just want to quickly acknowledge that I'm going to be the one walking us through the slide deck, but I also have Lori Guilfoyle and Dinah Wilson on the call with me tonight to help answer questions. And Councilmember Michaud also participated in the process this year, so she'll be a good source of information as well. And just in terms of flow, I'm going to start kind of high level, but I will drill down into more specifics as we go. So feel free to ask questions as we go, but it might get answered in later slides. In terms of background, I think you all know this already, but I just wanted to start off with a little background info just as a reminder. One of the primary human services roles is that of funder, and we allocate both city general funds and federal CDBG funds to support that network of services to respond to our community needs. And the majority of the presentation this evening will focus on the general fund side of the process, but we're happy to answer questions about CDBG as well. So the city started funding human services back in 1974 through some federal revenue sharing by granting $5,000 to the Kent Food Bank, who we still fund today. Our funding is established by ordinance, and our per capita rate currently is sitting at around $8.12. And that's based on the 2019 population of just almost 130,000 residents, making our allocation roughly $1,050,000. And again, that's specific to general fund. The application process occurs every 2 years. So in 2020, our process was specific to funding for 2021, 2022. And in our next cycle will be in 2022 for funding in 2023, 2024, if you get that. So we open every even year for funding the next 2 years. Kent is a member of the Human Services Funders Collaborative. We're one of 17 cities participating in that. And basically what that means is we agree to one common application in terms of content and timeline. So the platform we use is called Share One App. And once those applications are submitted, then each city utilizes their own internal process for review and making the funding recommendations. The reporting process, so the quarterly billing and service reports, that also happens through the common system. And that includes annual demographic and outcome reports, which will start rolling in later this month for 2020. And all of our funds are allocated on a reimbursement basis. We don't fund the programs upfront. So that reporting side of the process is really important for the agencies. And then finally, the funding recommendations are made by the Human Services Commission. So staff does participate in the review process, and we facilitate the sessions. We provide background detail and opinions when asked, but really at the end of the day, the recommendations belong to the commission. It's really our job as staff to do our best throughout the year to ensure commissioners have that high level of understanding about the community, the need, the gaps, and the services. And we try really hard to make sure that we're including both those we fund and those that we do not fund. There's a lot of work that goes into the pre-application process period before a cycle is opened. Strategic planning and evaluation are always ongoing. We are continuously reviewing programs we invest in and evaluating where we might have gaps, emerging need, always looking and seeing where we're at. The application cycle is really never done. Our so-called off years are spent refining the process and planning for the next one. For example, last year, Northeast and South funders met to revise the application questions, and that process included consulting with 3 grant makers of color, as well as Communities Rise, and reviewing other grant applications out there to really help us move forward to a more equitable application. And then in advance of the application opening, we're already starting to reach out to partners, again, both those currently funded and not funded. And then we start with training our staff and our commissioners just in terms of how to really read, review, rate applications. And this year we had a very specific focus on reviewing with an equity lens, and we'll talk more about that in greater detail later. And we also hold 2 application workshops ahead of every cycle. Typically we hold one of those in South King County and one in East King County. This year, we were able to hold one in person, the one in East King County, and the second one ended up having to be held virtually. But we did record both of those sessions and made those available online. The application process itself, we post all of the requirements on the Share One app website, including minimum requirements, an application checklist, budget templates, really in-depth step-by-step instructions. Again, we post the recordings of both the application workshops, including the PowerPoint that was used, and we even list all the questions in Word document form for those who are less comfortable working in the actual application database and would rather do it in Word. And we did a written version of all of the Q&A that came up in the workshops so that those who couldn't attend in person had access to all the same information. And then we, and I really mean Lori, Dinah, and Christine, throughout this process, really work hard to go above and beyond to be available to agencies during the contracting period and the application period. They provide assistance by phone, by email. They talk through the different application components. They give feedback on what to include in responses. They're totally willing to discuss new concepts, and they'll go even into the really technical pieces with applicants in terms of budgets, Kent-specific priorities, what makes a strong application. They'll review draft applications. They'll give feedback on how to strengthen them. They really, really do go the extra mile to make sure they can provide whatever assistance a specific applicant might need. And then once the applications have been submitted, staff reviews each one to make sure all the questions are answered and the agency profile is complete. They double check things like the 501c3, make sure that that's in good standing. They check non-discrimination policies. That's something that's pretty specific to Kent. And then at that point, we do have to make some decisions about which don't move forward and deem those incomplete. But again, that's really something that we leave up to the commission. We'll let them know why we haven't forwarded it to them for review. And if there's some reason that the commission decides that they want to pull it in and evaluate it anyway, that's up to them. So commission review this year we had to adjust in response to the pandemic. We typically divide into two groups and have at least one half day and one full day session. But this year we divided into 4 groups initially, and we had to add some sessions so that we could break up the amount of time spent on Zoom. Not very many of us want to spend an entire day on Zoom. I know you can relate to that. During our first review, we focused on new programs or those not previously funded. So this is something that we hadn't done before either, but we really wanted to make sure that those applications had a fair shake and a really thorough review. The second review focused on all of those applications that are currently funded. And then in the third meeting, we focused on those moved forward and recommended for funding. And then after council budget approval, we transitioned to the contracting side, where we're notifying all of the agencies of their awards and staff prepare scopes of work and contract. And we're really just kind of in the process of wrapping that up right now. I should also mention that we hold a workshop for the Kent funded agencies that's really focused in on that reporting and compliance. And then we continue to offer technical support. That's something that is new this year, just to ensure that everybody is really tuned into compliance and knows exactly what is expected of them, because we want to set everyone up for success. This slide is just a visual of the key milestones between the opening of the cycle and the commission recommendations vote. So it's a really intense couple months. We typically, in a normal year, would try to wrap up in June, but we did have to hold 2 meetings in July this year just to ensure that we had enough time to do the really focused review. So in addition to the specific work with the Human Services Commission this year, I just wanted to point out that Human Services staff have participated in numerous equity and social justice trainings, committees, workshops, task force over the years. So the work we have been involved in historically, I feel like it has really helped guide and inform us as we continue to move forward in this work. So I don't want to read through each one of these, but I just wanted to make sure to highlight the work, particularly that Dinah and Lori have been doing in these areas, really honestly for years and years, and just kind of acknowledge the foundation that their efforts have set up for us as we keep moving forward, furthering our focus on equity. So in addition to that more foundational work, we decided back in 2019 that we wanted to do some focus training around grant making with an equity lens with our commission. So it didn't happen exactly the way we planned, but even with the onset of the pandemic happening right as we were starting to dive into this work, it was honestly a little bit tempting to delay it, but we pressed forward while other cities did delay some of this type of work, primarily because we could just see the disparities that were already starting to occur. So we felt like it was really critical, even with everything else that was going on, to press on with this. So the first training was what we kind of consider an introductory training, and it was facilitated by Kiana Wheeler, and Kiana works for the City of Seattle Race and Social Justice Program, and she's an equity and race relations consultant. And that training was really about coming to kind of some common understanding of terms like diversity and access, inclusion and equity, words that we all hear all the time, but not everybody has the same understanding of. So it was really mostly designed to make sure we started with that common level of understanding. And the next two sessions, we consulted with Kaya Strategic, and those were very focused on the application process itself and how we could keep equity top of mind throughout that. So the implicit bias in grant making session really keyed in on the challenges and the barriers that community-based organizations confront when applying for a grant. So kind of before, during, and after. So we talked through things like computer access, language, access to professional grant writers, relationships, what type of news sources they're linked to, how do they even hear about the application cycle? And then our second training focused on developing a guiding framework for decision-making and during the equity analysis. And as a result of the trainings, staff alongside commission, we actually ended up revising their review score sheet and adding equity analysis questions to their specific review. And we'll touch more on that in a little bit as well. But as I mentioned, this is a long one and I don't want to read all of it. Kaya Strategic, the consultants, we worked with two really fabulous consultants on this project. They did develop this guiding framework with our input, and it was really designed for decision-making. And then we ended up actually using them. We extended our contract so that they could help us facilitate the first two Human Services Commission review sessions. And again, that was just to help guide us through this process, make sure we kept it all very much in the forefront. And, essentially, so we didn't kind of fall back into old habits. But this is the framework that we used and referred to really continuously throughout the review and the decision-making process itself. So commitment to equity, inclusion, and diversity, a history and track record of equity values, really strong community relationships, inclusion of the target population and how and when services are provided, culturally relevant experience, and just kind of wanting to know if the racial, ethnic, or cultural community being served is reflected in the staff and leadership of the organization. We also, as part of this process, developed some equity prompts that we used to continuously just challenge our thoughts and decision-making as we went through the process. So the prompts reminded us to question our assumptions, to think about why we may not have previously heard about a particular organization. Maybe this is their first grant application they've written, checking whether we are over-scrutinizing the groups we don't know. And on the flip side, are we being easier on the organizations we work more closely with? Do we have conflicts of interest? Do our commissioners have conflicts of interest? And are there follow-up questions that staff could ask the organizations to help clear up some concerns? Oh, and I meant to mention earlier, but something else we did that was new to our process this year was that we added an independent non-voting reviewer, Martha Lucas, to participate and offer an outside perspective. So we have talked for years now, I think, about the concept of adding kind of independent student reviewers, maybe from Highline or some of the high schools. But with COVID this year, it was easier to start small, and Martha came really highly recommended to us from Puget Sound SAGE. She was one of their 2019 Community Leadership Institute cohort members, and she had extensive experience working with underserved and underrepresented communities. And it was really great to have her perspective. We were down one commissioner, and One other of our commissioners actually got stuck in Ethiopia during the pandemic and some of the travel restrictions. So it was helpful to add a voice so that it wasn't such a small group. And then I just, want to also call out that the commissioners had an incredibly challenging job this year. I know that they felt the responsibility to the individuals and the community we all serve, really even more so with the pandemic shining such a glaring spotlight on the disparities in the community. It was really, really hard to narrow the field because honestly, every one of the applications that they read is a program that would add value to our community. So there were no easy agencies to just eliminate. It was really, really hard, and they did a lot of really good work. Historically, our primary focus was on meeting needs of the community, prior performance, presence and partnership in the community, quality of the proposal, cost effectiveness, and then really focusing in on that balance of the continuum. And then in an effort to further racial equity this year, we placed more focus on things like intended population to be served, again, whether the board and the staff reflect the community they're serving, partnerships or collaboration that they might be involved in, demonstrated understanding of challenges and barriers associated with accessing programs and services, especially this year, and also culturally responsive services, and trying to key in on whether input of the community that they are trying to serve is evident in that program design. And then I know this is probably getting a little too specific, but I pulled in some of the questions from the commission score sheets just so that you could see some of the things that they were specifically rating. So addressing an emerging or unique need or identified priority in the community, on that continuum towards inclusion and belonging, positive impact of the activity on the community and clients. Does this investment reach the populations most impacted by society's structural inequities? And just basic, is it a good use of our funds? And would you, as a commissioner, recommend funding this program? So just diving briefly into some numbers. In 2020, we received 106 applications requesting funds totaling nearly 2.7 million. We did have to deem 8 applications incomplete so that they did not move forward for review. We allocated over $1 million in general fund investments, including 12 new programs. And at the same time, we added that $670,500 in CDBG CV funds. So that process actually happened concurrently, which is, I still can't believe we managed to pull all of that off. Just some of the agencies that weren't funded in 2020 that are being funded in 2021, just for your information, there's Bridge of Promise, Community Network Council, Consejo, Eastside Baby Corner, El Centro de la Raza, Institute for Family Development, Iraqi Community Center, Mercy Housing, St. Vincent de Paul, Divina Providencia, Holy Spirit. It's a long one. Utopia, Vine Maple Place, and World Relief. So lots of great new programs added to our funding repertoire for this year. I really do think it was a pretty solid process. And the fact that we did it in the middle of a pandemic while really kind of operating in crisis response, I just honestly can't thank our staff and our volunteers enough. They were amazing, and throughout the entire process, just really, really dedicated to getting this right. That said, while we feel like we made significant amount of positive movement, and you can move to the next slide, Kim, we felt like it was important to take a critical look at the process after the fact. And we really wanted to reflect on the entire process from beginning to end. And initially, we planned to conduct an equity analysis of our work in-house. But just after talking it through and really trying to come up with a plan, we felt it was important to engage a neutral consultant who is really skilled and focused on evaluation. So we have hired Equitable Future, and they will be having 6 focus groups in the first quarter of this year. They're going to include organizations who applied for and received funding from the city, but they're also going to make sure that they include agencies who applied and did not receive funding from the city. And we've also asked them to do some specific outreach to organizations that serve Kent residents but did not choose to apply, or those who were funded in the past but didn't apply. So we don't want to leave out those organizations that we know are serving our residents, but for whatever reason chose not to apply in this cycle. I also want to remember to have Dinah give a brief update on the next round of CDBG CV funding. So we can either do that now, or I can take your questions and have her do that at the end.
Anybody have, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. Merina, I think you said there's 112 that applied, 8 was not properly filled out. So did the rest, everybody that applied, did they get funding?
No, we're not ever able to fund every application, unfortunately. Let me think. Lori, I feel like you spouted this stat off today. I think we fund something, 90 something programs.
Okay.
I may have just made that up though.
No, that's okay.
That might include CDBG too.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
actually,
no,
we have 54 total programs that we fund.
Okay, so you were spouting, it was a partnership
Partners, yeah.
data that I heard earlier. Thanks.
And just one follow-up too is, I know there's a process they get the funding, maybe at a high level. Do they come back and check, say this is what we did and how we spent the money? Can you just quickly talk about that?
Correct. Yeah, I kind of mentioned it briefly earlier, the fact that all of the funding is done via reimbursement. So the agencies, in good faith are serving our residents in January, February, and March, and then they report to us. We have a specific scope of work for each project. So they report to us number of Kent residents that they served, and we have specific other things that they have to meet. And so they'll submit those numbers along with their bill for that first quarter. So we review that and make sure everything's in line before we release any funds. And we do that each quarter.
And my last question is, so you got a lot of people asking for money. So when you look at an application, is it possible there could be some redundancy between application and serving the same region / population, or there's so much need out there that it probably you don't look into that?
No, we do look through that as part of the application process, in terms of we do get some duplicative applications kind of doing very similar things.
Right.
So we try to dive then into the specific populations that they're serving. So that's when we really get into the details of the demographics. So if it's a mentoring program that's serving after school, we'll look at what population that particular group tends to serve, and that will help us evaluate if they're different. And, we can look further into cost per service unit, and we use other ways to evaluate if we have to really make a decision one or the other. But usually Kent has such a diverse population and is so large that usually they are serving different individuals. So that helps.
Last comment, great work you and your team is doing, especially during this tough time that we're all going through. So it's really very much appreciative of you and your team, all the great work you guys are doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good questions, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Council President. First, Merina, Lori, team, I just want to say thank you. I mean, you guys took a huge amount of work in taking this equity lens. It's as you're describing all the work you did with the consultants and your planning and your training. That's a lot of things. I think a lot of groups would probably break into smaller chunks, and you guys did a whole lot. So just kudos and hats off to you for doing that all and moving forward with that work at a time that it would probably have been a lot easier to do it differently. I do have a couple questions. Merina, I know we've covered this before, but can you remind me, what is the makeup of the commission itself? Because I know we try to have recipients and providers on the commission.
Yeah, so the commission is typically made up of individuals representing agencies representing the faith community, local business, different, I want to say it's like regional boards. I'm not sure exactly how we put that. There is a youth member. We have a commissioner representing the senior population in Kent who works over at Harrison House for the Housing Authority. And we have some diversity in terms of, we have some experience with someone working at the the Seattle Housing Authority right now. And we have her also representing kind of the immigrant and refugee side. She came to our community from Ethiopia. And we have, I'm trying to like go through them all right now in my head. We always have a council member. We do have a youth member, but we are currently recruiting for a new one because our current youth member graduated, and it's always a tough year when they're a senior. We don't get as much
Do we
participation.
have any commissioners that have been, recipients of the programs before?
So we have had that in the past. We don't currently have anyone in that position. I think Salam helps us fulfill that position with her work at the Housing Authority. So anyone who's working directly with clients, we ask for them to kind of help provide that background. But it's a challenge for most people. We do get applications occasionally, but it is a challenge in terms of being able to make the monthly meetings, sometimes depending on their job. We run into that same issue with the students in terms of trying to find the balance for people who are really interested and who are able to also be at the meetings. But whenever we have an opening, we review the applications that we've received and we try to balance. So we always try to make sure we don't have more than 2 representing any one category. So that's actually in our ordinance. It specifies how we come to the makeup of the commission.
Wonderful. And then you talked about some of the barriers, and among them was how do you, evaluating, how groups could potentially don't hear about the cycle or are missing the information about how to, that this is even available. How will you be addressing that, or what were some of the findings there where you feel like you can make improvements on recruiting or getting the word out where it may not be, groups may not have awareness?
Sure. So we rely pretty heavily on just a lot of our internal distribution lists that we have. So we send it out every channel that we can possibly think of, including the Kent Cultural Diversity Initiative groups, email distribution, which has a lot of community leaders. And we always make sure that we ask people to pass the information along. It's published in the newspaper. It's published on Facebook. We use there's an actual distribution list on the ShareOne app of any organization that has ever submitted their email or signed up for any of the databases. I wish I had looked at the number of individuals that those announcements go to. It's huge, but of course that's all Northeast and South King County. But
we get any sort of notification from the state when there's a new 501c3 registered or anything like that?
We don't. No, I mean, we pretty much, between Lori and Dinah and Christine and the various community groups and places that they participate, because we're involved in so many community meetings, we do feel like we get pretty good coverage, but there's always organizations that we, don't necessarily know about. So we try to get the word spread as broadly as we possibly can, but we're always open to finding and learning new ways to share the information for sure.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and great work this year.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. Wonderful presentation, Merina.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone you were going through? So to Councilmember Larimer's question, just going a little bit more in depth on that. Do you know if there's anyone of the commissioners who has been, say, homeless in the past few years?
Of our current human services commissioners, I do not believe so, no.
Okay.
Although, I mean, we have, obviously that we have Bill Hallerman on our commission who does an excellent job representing the homeless community. And we do have TJ who has attended, a large number of our meetings in the past, not as many in 2020, offering perspective, but not currently on the commission.
And
In the past, we did have a woman who was housed with Watson Manor in the past, but that was quite a few years ago now.
Okay. And was it the entire commission or was it the staff who took the trainings, the Equity Lens trainings?
It was staff and the entire commission.
Good for you guys. Kudos to you guys for doing that. And I'm familiar with a number of the groups that you named I think they were the first time grantees. I know they're doing a lot of good work out there. So good job for you guys, because I know it's a ton of work. But I was glad to hear the diversity in the group that you mentioned. So thank you for giving such a good report tonight.
Thanks. And then I also probably should have mentioned the opportunity fund that the council so generously allocated to us that will be accessible to us next year. So that'll actually kind of coincide with our next application cycle. But again, that is really focused on that emerging need. And because, as I mentioned, we allocated funds now for 2021 and 2022. So that opportunity fund will really allow us to pay attention to what's happening in Kent and where the gaps are, and are there new organizations that Kent can support to help fill in some of those gaps. So that's exciting. And again, thank you for that.
You're welcome. When do you expect to have the information, the survey that's going to be going out, or the focus groups with the groups that received funding, those that didn't receive funding, those that didn't apply? When does that?
I will let Lori Guilfoyle jump in and respond to that question, because she is the one working with our consultant and drafted the scope of work and is working most closely on that project. Lori?
Okay.
Hi, good evening. The major part of the work will happen late January and February. She'll bring recommendations to us in March, and then a final report will be available at the end of March, first week of April. So first quarter.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to it.
Yeah, and just a little bit more information about that. We're really wanting to learn from the agencies themselves, how they felt about the process. So, I mean, it's not going to be easy, and there will probably be things that, are hard for us to hear as staff. We have no doubt. It's not, she has been very clear since we first interviewed her. And one of the reasons we chose her was because she seemed really willing to kind of ask some of those really hard questions. So it's going to be an interesting process. And I think it'll help us continue to be really, introspective and thoughtful about how we're moving this work forward. But we also want to find a way to really start to institutionalize some of this work on equity, because, I just mentioned all the training that we went through this year. Well, next process, we may have different staff, we will have different commissioners. So, just really trying to focus in on how we can build some of this into our work as we go, so that it's just a part of the process and then we don't have to go through training every single time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Corr, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, President. Thank you for the great presentation, Merina. And I want to say, I want to echo what all of my colleagues said. And I want to also say, I want to thank you, Lori and Dinah, because you guys are at every regional meeting out there. You guys are the leaders, and I know our whole community, our region looks up to you in many, many decisions they're working on. So it's always great to see you guys at different meetings and say, hey, Dinah's here, Lori's here. So I appreciate all the work you're doing, even during in 2020. Thank you.
They are amazing. I'm very lucky to have them.
So do we have any other questions? Was there anything else to add to the presentation, Merina?
I'm going to have Dinah jump in really quickly so that she can kind of give a quick update on the next round of CDBG CV funds. I know you guys are eagerly awaiting to see when that's going to kick off. So Dinah?
Yes, thanks, Marina. Great presentation, and thank you for all the compliments regarding the work. We want to talk just to update you on our community development block grant coronavirus funds. As you know from a presentation we did, I guess month before last now, we received some additional funds. It's round 3 is what is being called by HUD. And just wanted to let you know that we have to first amend our 2019 plan, and this is all at HUD's request. As you might recall, we came before you previously when we received the first round of funds for the amendment. So we're doing the amendment at our next Human Services Commission meeting on the 21st. And once that gets going, we can move forward. We're doing information gathering right now. I have a meeting this week with one of our legal organizations because we feel that legal services, especially if possible, eviction assistance is really important. So we're going to have a discussion with them and just see what they might have to offer. We're also next week meeting with an employment provider, and we've also reached out to another employment provider to just get a feel for some of the things that their work that they're doing and challenges that they're seeing. So we will make this process a lot simpler this time. We will get a concept paper, request a concept paper from organizations with just the basic information. We're learning a lot from this first round of funding, and that will really help inform our process as we go forward. We, as you know, wanted to really get these funds out, not just to the most critical needs, but we also wanted to spread the funds around, again, talking about the equity around delivering and distributing funds. We wanted to make sure that it didn't just go to the mainstream providers, the usual people organizations that get the money and may not, have language access and may not be the go-to people for some of the folks in our community, some of our folks who were born outside of the country or who speak another language. And so what we're learning is that we have to do a lot of training and working with organizations around reporting and compliance. And so we're actually glad to get this little bit of a pause because we anticipate distributing some of these funds to some of the existing organizations. We really want to make sure they're up to speed, that they understand how to report. A lot of times we take things for granted because we've been doing this work a long time, and we find out that, we can't do that. We have to really start on a basic level. Some of our organizations may not understand what sorts of receipts we need, something as basic as that. These funds require a lot of compliance and a lot of, reporting. And we're really working with our small organizations and even some of our larger organizations just to make sure that they meet those requirements. So we'll be looking to fold some of the newer things. We had a workshop a few weeks back with with all the organizations just to go over reporting and compliance. But we expect to get our concept paper ready to send to agencies this month, hopefully, and get those funds out. With the existing agencies, we don't anticipate we'll need much from them. We'll just probably have to amend their contracts and add additional funds to those that they already have. And it's good to have a kind of a little bit of a period to see, how these organizations are going to do with our reporting. Because of the duplications of benefits issue that HUD has really, really emphasized that we have to track this time. This is a new requirement. It really makes for more staff oversight and work. So that's where we are right now. And if you have questions now, please ask those of me, and I'd be happy to answer those. And feel free to reach out to us at any time.
Thank you. Any questions for Dinah? All right, anybody have any further questions about this particular presentation? All right, thank you so much. This was a really great presentation, like all of my colleagues have said. And, you know, when you talk about those numbers, you funded 54 organizations and 12 of those were new programs. So I really appreciate the work you're doing to make sure you're reaching all the groups in our community and looking at the different needs. It's very helpful for everyone, especially at this difficult time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks again for all of your support, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, that brings us to the end of our workshop this evening. So that gives you all a little bit of time to take a quick break. And we will see everyone back here for the first council meeting of the year at 7 p.m. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned.
Histories of surviving the Holocaust. And there's a really sort of fascinating psychological connection of why they create, when they came here, why they have created a lot of superheroes who are going to fight the bad guys, right? So that's a quite connection a lot of people miss, because there's a lot of, today, unfortunately, a lot of people on the extreme supremacist sort of parts of our society are actually appropriating characters like Captain America, that these characters belong to them. And that is just so antithetical to people who created these characters. So